The doorman told me the moving truck had already taken everything, including my 30 years of memories. I'm Eleanor, 74 years old, a retired antique restorer. My son thinks I'm just some old widow forgotten up in the Hudson Valley, but little does he know that apartment was just the bait I left dangling in the water. I've always loved the quiet of my house here in upstate New York. The chill in the air up here preserves things, keeps the wood firm and the mind clear. I was on the porch, rubbing lemon oil into a grandfather clock that belonged to my grandfather when the landline rang. Almost nobody calls the landline these days, only people bringing bad news or trying to sell you something you don't need. I answered, wiping my hand on a flannel cloth, never imagining my quiet life was about to be turned upside down. On the other end of the line, a hurried, almost metallic voice. It was Carl, the doorman from my building back in New York City, on the Upper West Side, that old building with high ceilings where I'd kept a small one-bedroom apartment for decades. It was my refuge when I needed to come down from the valley to scout for pieces at auctions or just to see the city lights. Mrs. Eleanor, it's Carl. Sorry to bother you at this hour, but the movers dropped a box of books in the hallway, and I wanted to know if you want me to keep it at the front desk or if they can just take it as is. I froze. The flannel cloth fell from my hand. Movers, Carl. What movers? I'm not moving. There was an awkward silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing and the sound of packing tape being ripped in the background. But Mrs. Eleanor, the apartment was sold. The new owner is already here with the keys. Mr. Richard, your son, was here last week with all the paperwork. He said you'd already taken everything that was important. A wave of dizziness hit me, as if the hardwood floors had vanished from beneath my feet. I leaned against the mahogany table. Sold. Richard sold my apartment. That place wasn't just walls and bricks. It was where I kept my china collection that took me 40 years to complete. It was where the letters from my late husband Arthur were. I hung up on Carl, trembling, promising to sort it out, and immediately dialed my son's cell. Richard answered on the third ring with that voice of someone who's too busy to talk to his mother, but answers out of social obligation. Hey, Mom. Talk fast. I'm walking into a meeting. Richard. My voice came out firmer than I expected. Maybe the anger was holding back my tears. Carl just called me. He said there are movers at my apartment in the city. He said you sold the place. He let out a short, dry laugh, the kind you give when you find someone else's ignorance amusing. Oh, that! For God's sake, Mom, I was going to tell you this weekend. A golden opportunity came up, a buyer paying in cash. You haven't set foot in that place in 6 months. It was just a drain, with the HOA fees and property taxes. You had no right, Richard. That apartment is mine. My things are there, my china, your father's letters. Mom, stop being so dramatic. He cut me off impatiently. I hired a clean-out crew. Anything that looked old went to the dump or Goodwill. Whatever seemed valuable, I had them put in a storage unit. We'll sort it out later. Besides, you didn't need that place anymore. You already have this huge house up here that's just collecting dust. The money will be invested in my construction company. It'll yield a lot more than just sitting there in old bricks. You threw my things away? I asked, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Things, Mom. Junk, old stuff. You live in the past. I did you a favor, freeing you from that burden. Now I have to go. The money's already in the account. I'll show you the transfer slip later. I'll manage it for you so you don't spend it on silly things. Bye. And he hung up. The dial tone echoed in my ear, mixed with the frantic beating of my heart. I sat down in the leather armchair, looking out at the hydrangea garden. The feeling of violation was physical. It wasn't just the property. It was the disrespect, his absolute certainty that I'm an invalid, an incompetent who can't manage her own assets. Richard was always like that, even as a boy. Ambitious, rushed, running over anyone in his way. But I never thought he'd be capable of forging my signature or using that old power of attorney from when I had my hip surgery 5 years ago to dispose of my assets behind my back. He saw me as the old lady with her antiques, the mother who spent her days sanding furniture and drinking tea. He thought my world was confined to that house in the Hudson Valley and that little apartment in the city. I took a deep breath. Smelling the beeswax, I prepared myself. Slowly, the trembling in my hands subsided. The initial outrage, that fire that climbs up your neck and burns your ears, began to cool and transform into something else, something harder, more solid, like varnish drying to protect the wood. I stood up and walked to my office. Not the little sewing room Richard knew, where I left the sewing machine in plain sight so he'd think I just hemmed pants. I went to my real office, the one hidden behind the false bookcase in the hallway. I pushed the panel and stepped inside. The smell in there was of aged paper and fountain pen ink. I turned on the green banker's lamp on the desk. Richard was right about one thing. I didn't need that apartment. But he was wrong about everything else. He'd laughed, said I didn't need it, and I began to smile too. A smile that didn't reach my eyes, but curled my lips in a dangerous way. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a heavy black leather portfolio. Inside, there were no cake recipes or photos of grandchildren. There were deeds, lots of deeds. My son, in his modern entrepreneur arrogance, had forgotten where the money that paid for his college degree came from. He forgot that before I restored furniture, I bought and sold entire buildings downtown, back in an era when a woman needed her husband's permission just to breathe. Arthur was the friendly face, but I was the brains. I was the one who saw potential where no one else did. I was the one who negotiated, who bent contractors and lawyers to my will with a sweet smile and an ironclad contract. When Arthur died, I moved everything into holdings, shell corporations, real estate investment trusts, all very discreet. Richard knew we were comfortable, but he never knew the true scale. To him, I lived off his father's pension and a few trickling rent payments. That apartment on the Upper West Side was the smallest, literally the most insignificant property I owned, a single grain of sand on the beach of my estate. He thought he was pulling a masterstroke, selling my great hidden treasure. I pulled out the consolidated bank statement, the one that only arrives via registered mail and that I pick up myself from the post office box, far from the prying eyes of my daughter-in-law and my son. Richard sold the apartment for, let's say, $800,000, a steal. He probably sold it to a buddy of his to get some quick cash. He must be feeling like the king of the world right now, thinking he has control of my money, that he'll invest it in his company, which I know is struggling due to his own mismanagement. What he doesn't know is that the apartment was the only asset still in my personal name, purely by oversight, a remnant from an old estate settlement. Everything else? Oh, everything else was shielded. But his audacity, the phrase, "You didn't need that place anymore," echoed in my head. It wasn't about needing it. It was about him thinking he could decide when I ceased to exist, when my things became trash. He discarded my china, discarded my history. I looked at the safe built into the wall and spun the combination, the date of my first victorious auction. The heavy door swung open. Inside, there were no jewels. I was never one for flaunting gold. Inside were the dossiers. For years, I had observed Richard. I observed how he treated his employees, how he withheld information from his partners, how he lived a life of luxury built on debts he was constantly juggling. I always helped, always covered his shortfalls, always pretended to believe his excuses of, "The market is tough, Mom." That's what we do. We want to protect them. But today he crossed a line. He invaded my sanctuary. He treated me like an obsolete object. I picked up the phone again. This time, I didn't call him. I called Mr. Stevens, my trusted lawyer of 40 years, the only one who knew the exact size of the empire the little old restorer had built. "Hello, Stevens. It's me, Eleanor." "Eleanor, what a pleasure. Has something happened? Your voice sounds different." "It has, my friend. I've woken up. Richard sold the apartment on the Upper West Side, the old one." "What? Without your signature? That's a felony, Eleanor. We can nullify the sale right now, freeze everything, put him in jail for fraud and forgery." I took a deep breath. The thought of Richard in handcuffs crossed my mind, but I quickly dismissed it. It would be too fast, too easy, and he would still play the victim to the whole family. He'd say he did it for my own good and that I was going senile. No, the lesson had to be educational. It had to hurt where it hurts a man like him the most, in his wallet and his ego. "No, Stevens, we're not going to nullify the sale. Let him keep the money for now. Let him think he's won. But Eleanor, your things. Things are gone. Stevens, but dignity remains. I want you to prepare the audit, the full one. I want to review all the leaseback agreements my holding company has with his construction firm. I want to review the rent on the warehouses he uses and has forgotten to pay for 2 years because he thinks they belong to his late father. I want to trigger the performance clauses. I heard the click of Stevens's pen on his desk. He was getting it. You're going to turn off the tap, Eleanor? No, Stevens. I'm not just going to turn off the tap, I'm going to rip out the entire plumbing. He said I didn't need the apartment because it was old. Well, let's see if he needs the old warehouses, the old plots of land, and the old money from his mother to maintain that life of appearances. Understood? When do we start? Immediately, but quietly. I want him to think I'm depressed, crying in a corner. Let him spend the money from the sale. Let him feel powerful. The higher he climbs on that pedestal of sand, the harder the fall will be. I hung up. Outside, the fog was beginning to roll in over the valley, blanketing the pine trees. It was a beautiful afternoon, gray and cool, just the way I like it. I went to the kitchen and made a strong cup of coffee. I poured it into my favorite cup, the one made of fine china that Richard would have probably thrown in the trash if he'd gotten his hands on it, thinking it was just some old thing. I sat back down on the porch. The moving truck with my memories must be far away by now, perhaps at some landfill in New Jersey. Did it hurt? It hurt a lot. A single tear rolled down my face, tracing the path of the wrinkles I had earned with so much effort. But I dried it quickly. Richard thought he had pulled the rug out from under me, but he forgot that I own the land, the foundation, and the roof. I picked up a notebook and started to write. It wasn't a diary. It was a plan, item by item. The apartment was the pawn he'd captured on the chessboard, thinking he'd won the game. He didn't see that in doing so. He had left his king completely exposed. I smiled again, sipping the hot coffee. That apartment was indeed the least of my assets. But the lesson I was about to teach my son would be the greatest inheritance I could ever leave him. Tomorrow, I'll drive down to the city, not to get my things, but to reclaim what is mine by right, respect. And if he thinks an old woman has no value, he's about to find out, the hard way, just how much an authentic antique costs when it decides to bill for its own restoration. I snapped the notebook shut. The game had begun. I drove down from the valley at sunrise, behind the wheel of my vintage but immaculate car. The Uber driver my son insisted I use would never understand the pleasure of feeling the firm steering wheel in my hands, the control of the machine. The Hudson Valley fog gave way to the humid, noisy heat of New York City. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Not the empty apartment, walls are just walls, but the storage unit where Richard claimed to have kept whatever seemed valuable. The address his secretary gave me, poor girl, she had no idea when I called, pretending to be a confused aunt, led me to one of those rental warehouses in the industrial part of Brooklyn, a soulless place with metal corridors and white fluorescent lights that hurt the eyes. The employee, a young man chewing gum, unlocked unit number 34 with a bored look. "Here you go, Grandma. Rent's due on the 5th, he said, turning his back on me. Grandma. I swallowed the insult, flicked on the light, and what I saw made my stomach turn more than any curve on the highway. There was no care, no respect. The boxes were stacked haphazardly, some crushed under the weight of others. I opened the first one. My linen towels, embroidered by my mother, thrown in like rags. In the second box, the sound of broken glass announced the tragedy before I even lifted the lid. It was the English dinner service, the cobalt blue one. Of the 12 plates, 3 remained intact. The rest were shards. Richard hadn't hired a professional moving company. He must have sent some intern to just dump everything in here in a hurry. I picked up a chipped piece of porcelain. The gold rim glittered under the cold light. That plate had served dinners to governors, to artists, to people my son would now pay a fortune just to shake hands with. There, in that stuffy unit, I understood the true extent of what Richard thought of me. I was a burden, a loose end he needed to tie up and hide in a dark corner so I wouldn't clash with the modern decor of his life. I closed the box slowly. I didn't cry. The tears had been left in the valley. What I felt now was a terrifying clarity. I dusted off my hands on my dress and walked out. That emotional garbage would stay there for now. I had a much more important appointment downtown. I walked through the bustling streets of the financial district, blending into the crowd. No one looks twice at a white-haired old lady with a handbag on her arm and comfortable shoes. I was invisible, and invisibility, I learned long ago, is the greatest superpower a woman can have in business. I entered the glass-fronted skyscraper on Wall Street. The security guard, an older man who'd worked there since it opened, widened his eyes and started to get up. I gave him a discreet signal, a finger to my lips. He nodded with a smile and buzzed me through the turnstile. He knew who owned the building. Richard, who rushed past here to get to the city clerk's office, never bothered to look at who signed the deed for the building that housed his lawyer's firm. On the 20th floor, the reception was quiet and cold. Stevens was waiting for me at the door of the conference room with the expression of a man about to go to war. "The coffee is fresh, Eleanor, and the papers are on the table," he said, closing the heavy solid wood door behind us. I sat at the head of the table. On the glass surface were stacks of colored folders. Each color represented an arm of my estate: commercial properties, land for development, shares in logistics companies, and of course the red folder, the intertwined businesses with my son's construction company. "Let's start with the audit I asked for yesterday," I said, putting on my reading glasses. Stevens cleared his throat and opened the red folder. "The situation is more delicate than we imagined, Eleanor. Richard isn't just struggling. He's been operating in the red for 2 years. The sale of your apartment? Well, the money didn't even warm his account. It went straight to covering the interest on a bank loan that was coming due. He plugged one hole by digging another. Typical," I murmured, analyzing the numbers. "He always bit off more than he could chew." "There's more." Stevens pulled out a city map and spread it on the table. "You know the distribution center he uses in the Bronx? That huge warehouse where he keeps all his heavy machinery and construction material stock?" "I do. I bought that land in the 80s when that area was nothing but weeds and mud. It's in the name of Sunflower Holdings." "Exactly. Sunflower Holdings, of which you are the majority shareholder with 99% of the shares. The lease agreement for that warehouse with Richard's company expired 3 months ago. He didn't renew. He's occupying the property illegally, and worse, he stopped paying rent 6 months ago, telling the management company, which he thinks is a foreign group, that he's in negotiations." I ran my hand over the map. That warehouse was the heart of his company. Without that space, he had nowhere to store his machines. Without machines, the project stopped. Without projects, he didn't get paid by clients. It was a house of cards, and he had just sold his mother's home to try and stop the wind from blowing. "He thinks Sunflower Holdings is owned by German investors, doesn't he?" I asked, vaguely remembering creating that smokescreen years ago to stop him from asking the family for favors. "Yes, he sends emails in English to the management company asking for extensions." I took off my glasses and massaged my temples. For years, I had watched this from a distance. I let him play businessman, thinking I was protecting his self-esteem. "Let the boy try," Arthur used to say. "He needs to learn to fly." But Richard didn't learn to fly. He learned to fall and expect someone to put a mattress underneath. And I was the mattress I always was. When he crashed his car in college, I paid for the repairs and said it was the insurance. When he needed his first office, I arranged for a friend to be his guarantor, who was actually me. I was a fool. I created a weak man, thinking I was raising a winner. The blame for his arrogance is also mine. I fed the monster that has now devoured my apartment and spat my memories into a dirty storage unit. But the blame ends today. I stood up and went to the window. The view of the harbor was beautiful. So many buildings, so many stories. I helped build part of that. I negotiated cement prices when women weren't allowed on construction sites. I argued interest rates with bankers who smoked cigars and laughed at my skirt until they saw I could calculate percentages better than they could. They underestimated me because I was a woman. Richard underestimates me because I'm old. It's the same mistake. Thinking the shell defines the contents. Thinking that because my hands tremble a little when I hold a teacup, my mind trembles when I sign a check. "Stevens," I called without turning. "How much time does the law require for a commercial eviction notice when there's no active contract and there's a default in payment?" I heard his chair swivel. By law, we can request immediate repossession, but standard practice is to give 30 days. 30 days? I repeated. It was too long. He'd use those 30 days to sell something else, to make another mess. And if there's a clause for repossession for personal use? Well, that changes things. If the owner, in this case the holding company, can prove it needs the property for immediate use, the notice period shortens drastically. But what would you use an industrial warehouse full of bulldozers for? I turned to him and for the first time in days gave a real smile. I'm a restorer, Stevens. I need space. My workshop in the Hudson Valley has become too small. I'm thinking of expanding, creating a center for large-scale furniture restoration. And I need that warehouse now. Stevens started to laugh, a hearty laugh from someone who got the inside joke. You're going to evict your own son's construction company to set up a workshop for old furniture. Antique furniture, Stevens. Antiques. They have value, history, and dignity. Things my son's company seems to be lacking at the moment. I returned to the table and picked up my pen. My hand didn't shake. I want you to prepare the notice, but don't send it yet. I want something more subtle to start. Let's mess with his cash flow before we take away his roof. Where else is his company bleeding? The truck fleet, the lawyer replied, flipping through another folder. 5 trucks financed by Meridian Bank. Meridian Bank was absorbed by that investment fund where you have a seat on the board, remember? I remember. The fund that buys up bad debt. Exactly. The debt on Richard's trucks is classified as high risk, 90 days overdue. The bank could have already repossessed the vehicles, but since he's an old client, they're holding off. They're holding off because his manager is a golf buddy. I know how these things work. I tapped the tip of my pen on the table, marking the rhythm of my thoughts. Buy the debt, Stevens. What? Use Sunflower Holdings. Buy the truck debt from the bank. Pay cash with a discount. The bank will be thrilled to get rid of the problem. As soon as the debt is ours, execute the lien. You want to have his construction trucks repossessed? That will halt his projects tomorrow. No, I don't want them repossessed tomorrow. I want the sheriff to show up at lunchtime when all the employees are in the yard. I want him to feel the public shame, but give him an option. What option? Immediate settlement of the total debt. If he doesn't have the money, well, then the trucks go to the auction yard, the same fate he thought was appropriate for my belongings. Stevens was scribbling everything down furiously. I could see the glint in his eyes. He was also tired of Richard's arrogance, who was always calling the office demanding things he wasn't entitled to. Eleanor, this is surgical. But he'll know it's you. He won't. The sheriff will present the collection notice on behalf of Credit G, a subsidiary of the fund. To him, it will just be the bank playing hardball. He will never connect the little old lady from the Hudson Valley to a high-risk investment fund. I glanced at the wall clock. It was 3 p.m. Richard was probably at his club right now, celebrating the sale of my apartment, buying whiskey for his friends with the money from my broken china. He was probably laughing, telling them how clever he was, how he'd gotten rid of a dead weight. The sense of power coursing through my veins was better than any blood pressure medication. I had spent the last 10 years shrinking to fit into the space they left for me. The space of grandma, the widow, the poor dear. I accepted being a supporting character in my own life, but the stage has changed and the lights are on. One more thing, Stevens, I said, closing the red folder gently. That apartment. Who bought it? A guy named Mark Vincent, a real estate speculator, friend of Richard's, paid $800,000. The property is worth $5 million minimum. Buy it back. Stevens stopped writing and looked at me over his glasses. Eleanor, the man just bought it. He's not going to sell, and if he does, he'll ask for double. Offer him double. Offer him triple if you have to. Use the holding company's cash. I want my apartment back, but not in my name. Put it in the name of an offshore company. I want Richard to know his friend made a killing at the expense of his stupidity. And I want it so that when I move back in, no one knows I'm the owner. You're going to spend a fortune just out of spite? It's not spite, my friend. It's strategy. The apartment is my observation post. It's close to everything, and I want my keys back. Besides, the money will just move from one pocket to another, since Richard will lose everything he gained paying off the debts we're about to call in. In the end, it's a closed loop. I stood up, feeling 10 years younger. My dress seemed to fit better. The aches in my joints had vanished. Prepare the paperwork for the truck debt acquisition today. I want the sheriff at his door on Wednesday. It's payday for the workers. The yard will be full. It's done, Mrs. Eleanor. Stevens stood and shook my hand with renewed respect. It's good to have you back in the game. The market was getting very dull without the Iron Lady of real estate. I smiled, grabbing my purse. The Iron Lady got a little rusty, Stevens, but nothing a good sanding and a new coat of varnish can't fix. And Richard. Mike, he's going to be the first to test the material's strength. I left the office and took the elevator. As I descended, I saw my reflection in the mirrored metal. An elderly woman with white hair and discreet pearls. The perfect picture of fragility. Excellent. Let them keep seeing only that. When I stepped out onto the Wall Street sidewalk, the afternoon sun was strong. I took out my phone. There was a message from Richard. Mom, deposited $200 in your account for you to do some shopping. Kisses. $2,000. The price of one of his dinners. He thought he was giving me a generous allowance. I replied simply, Thank you, son. God bless you. I put the phone away. He was going to need the blessing because his luck had just changed hands. I crossed the street towards the parking garage. Wednesday was coming, and with it, the first act of my play. Richard thought he had sold my past, but he had no idea he had just mortgaged his own future. Wednesday dawned with that dense silence that precedes a storm in the mountains. I was in my workshop at the back of the house, a chisel in my hand and a piece of rosewood clamped in the vise. It was the leg of a Louis XV-style chair that needed to be redone. The wood was rotten on the inside, eaten by termites, though the varnish on the outside still shone. A perfect metaphor for my son's financial life. As I carved the wood with millimeter precision, my cell phone vibrated on the workbench. It was a short text from Mr. Stevens. The sheriff has just entered the yard. 12:30 p.m. sharp. Lunchtime, as you requested. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and took a deep breath. There was no joy in my chest, only the cold satisfaction of someone setting a bone back in place. It hurt, but it was necessary to heal. I pictured the scene, the construction workers with their lunchboxes, the sun overhead, and the 5 cement mixer trucks, the pride of Richard's fleet, being surrounded by officers and the sheriff. I went back to work. The rhythm of the sandpaper on the wood calmed me. Each stroke was another second of panic back in the city. I knew the phone would ring soon. Richard never handled real pressure well. He's the type to yell at a waiter when an order is late but stammers when the bank manager raises his voice. 15 minutes passed. The phone rang. Richard flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times. Answering too quickly would show anxiety. Answering too slowly would seem like neglect. On the 4th ring, I slid my finger across the screen. Hello, son. My voice came out calm, with that velvety tone of someone who's only worried about whether her cake is done. Mom! Mom! You are not going to believe what's happening. This is an outrage, an abuse of power. He was yelling so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. In the background, I could hear the sound of sirens and agitated voices. Calm down, Richard. What's wrong? Speak slowly, son. They took the trucks. They took everything. Some fund Credit G bought the debt from the bank and executed without any warning. Right in the middle of the yard, Mom, in front of the workers. The humiliation. But son, weren't you paying the installments? There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a stammered excuse. Well, there was a small delay. Market stuff. Bank bureaucracy. But they can't do this. I need money, Mom, now to get the trucks back or my project stops tomorrow. If the project stops, I get hit with a penalty clause from the mall I'm building. How much, Richard? $300,000, to pay it all off and cover the fees. I know you don't have that liquid, but you could mortgage the house in the Hudson Valley. Or maybe there's something left of Grandma's jewelry. I closed my eyes. The audacity. He sold my apartment behind my back less than a week ago, pocketed the money, and now he wanted me to mortgage my home. Richard, my voice trembled, a prize-winning performance. $300,000? But son, The money from the apartment. You said you were going to invest it in the company. Where is that money? I had to pay other things, Mom. You don't understand cash flow. The money came in and went out. I need help, not an interrogation. Are you going to help me, or are you going to let your son go bankrupt? The usual emotional manipulation. Let your son go bankrupt. Son, you know I live off my retirement and my restoration work. That $2,000 you sent me. I can give it back to you. It's all I have. $2,000? He laughed. A hysterical laugh. $2,000 won't even pay the lawyer to file an injunction. Forget it, Mom. Forget it. You never understand the gravity of the situation. He hung up on me. I placed the phone back on the workbench and picked up the chisel. The wood yielded under the sharp blade, revealing the sound part beneath the wrought. Oh, I do understand, my son. I whispered to the empty workshop. I understand the gravity much better than you do. The rest of the afternoon was a ballet of information coming from Mr. Stevens. The truck seizure was a complete success. Richard tried to call the bank manager, who washed his hands of it, saying the debt was no longer theirs. He tried to call his friends from the club, but no one lends $300 on a Wednesday afternoon to someone who's just had their assets seized. News travels fast. In the business world, the smell of blood attracts sharks, but scares away partners. By the end of the day, I received the second part of my silent victory. Stevens called me, his voice restrained, but I could feel his smile. Mrs. Eleanor, you were right about Mark Vincent. Mark Vincent was Richard's friend who bought my Upper West Side apartment for $800 Azordo dollars, a cheap speculator who posed as a savvy investor. Did he accept the offer? I asked, pouring myself a cup of chamomile tea. He accepted immediately. My offshore company offered $6 million cash payment. He thought he'd won the lottery. Sold the apartment back without even questioning who the final buyer was. The property is yours again, Eleanor, only now it's shielded by an international corporation. Excellent. And Richard? That's the best part. Mark Vincent, overjoyed with his 100% profit in 1 week, called Richard to share his good fortune. He thanked your son for selling the property so cheaply. I smiled, sipping my tea. Imagining Richard's face upon learning his friend had made $800,000 on his back, the exact amount he desperately needed right now, was priceless. He was doubly cheated by his own greed and incompetence. Thank you, Stevens. Keep up the pressure. The next step is the warehouse. The eviction notice is ready. I'll send it tomorrow. No, wait for him to come here, because he will. He's cornered without trucks, and angry at his friend. He'll come looking for Mommy's comfort. Or rather, Mommy's safe. When he comes, I'll give the signal. And he came. It was Friday night. The fog covered the valley, giving everything a ghostly appearance. I was in the living room reading a book under the yellow light of a lamp when I heard his car's engine roaring up the stone driveway. He was driving aggressively, tires squealing on the curve. Richard stormed into the house like a hurricane. His dress shirt was wrinkled, he needed a shave, and he had deep circles under his eyes. The usual arrogance had given way to a feverish desperation. Mom! He threw his car keys on the coffee table, almost knocking over a crystal vase. We need to talk, seriously. I closed my book slowly, carefully marking the page. Good evening to you too, my son. Would you like some dinner? I made pea soup. I don't want soup, Mom. I want a solution. He paced back and forth, running his hands through his thinning hair. The world has turned upside down, that bastard Mark Vincent. Can you believe he resold your apartment? Resold it for double. Double. That money was mine. I mean, it was ours. The apartment wasn't yours to complain about the profit, Richard. You sold it. The buyer can do what they want. Isn't that the free market you admire so much? He stopped and looked at me, puzzled by my tone, but he was too agitated to notice the fine irony. You don't understand. I'm being attacked from all sides. The trucks are gone. I had to rent last-minute equipment to keep the project going at an absurd price. My cash flow is zero. Zero, Mom. And now there's a rumor that the warehouse management wants the property back. If I lose the warehouse, I have nowhere to store my materials. It's the end. He collapsed onto the sofa, defeated. For a second, I saw the little boy who would scrape his knee and come crying. My maternal instinct wanted to get up, hug him, and say I would write a check and fix everything. But then I looked at an empty shelf where my china used to be. I remembered you didn't need that place anymore. The compassion died. What remained was the need to educate. Richard, I began, my voice firm, do you remember when your father taught you how to ride a bike? What? What does that have to do with anything now, Mom? For God's sake. He used to say, look ahead, not at the ground. If you look at the ground, you'll fall. You've spent your life looking at the ground, Richard. Looking for quick money, for the immediate advantage. You sold my apartment because you saw easy cash. You didn't look ahead. You didn't see the property was worth more. You didn't see that I had feelings. Here you go with the sermon, he huffed, rolling his eyes. It's not a sermon, it's a fact. You call yourself a businessman, but you act like a gambling addict. Who is this Credit G that took your trucks? He looked at me, surprised. How do you know the name? You mentioned it on the phone. I lied with the ease of someone breathing. It sounds like a serious company, one that collects what it's owed. Why don't you pay what you owe, Richard? Because I don't have it. The money is tied up in future projects. Then sell the projects. Sell that imported car outside. Sell your membership at the golf club. He stood up, his face red with anger. Are you crazy? I can't lower my standard of living. What will people say? If I show up in a regular car, my clients will disappear. Appearances are everything in my business. Appearances are everything when you have no substance, I retorted, standing up as well. I stood before him. I was a foot shorter, but in that moment, I felt like my shadow swallowed him. You think I'm just an old woman who restores furniture, don't you? That I live in the past. Mom, don't start with your stories from the old days. Antiques have value because they've stood the test of time, Richard. They're made of solid wood, not particle board that swells at the first sign of rain. You built your life on particle board, and now it's raining. He took a step back, confused. He had never seen me speak like this. He expected the tearful mother, or the mother who opens her wallet. He found a stone wall. You're not going to help me, is that it? You have money saved, I know you do. Dad must have left something you're hiding. Your father left dignity, and I can't lend you that. You have to earn it. Richard scoffed, grabbing his keys again. Unbelievable. My own mother. Selfish, hoarding money under the mattress while her son is bleeding out. Fine. I'll find my own way. I always do. I'll go to a loan shark if I have to, but don't expect me to visit you for Christmas. Be careful with loan sharks, son. They tend to be less patient than investment funds. The sentence came out with a double meaning he didn't catch. He slammed the door on his way out. The sound echoed through the empty house. I went to the window and watched him angrily maneuver the car, almost hitting the gate. When the red taillights disappeared into the fog, I picked up my phone again. I dialed Stevens. He just left. He's desperate. He threatened to go to loan sharks. Should we block that? The lawyer asked. No, let him try. His name is already mud in the financial world because of the truck repossession. No serious loan shark will lend him the amount he needs without real collateral. And the only collateral he has is the construction company, Stevens completed. Exactly. But before he does something irreversible, let's tighten the last screw. Send the eviction notice for the warehouse tomorrow morning. I want him to receive it with his morning coffee. Mrs. Eleanor, are you sure? This will paralyze his company for good. I looked at my reflection in the window pane. My eyes shone with a determination I hadn't felt in decades. He said he'd find his own way, said he always does. Let's see how he fares when he has nowhere to hide his rented machinery. He took my roof in the city, Stevens. Said I didn't need it. Now let's see if he needs his. Understood. Tomorrow morning the sheriff will be there with the eviction order from Sunflower Holdings. Reason? Owner's personal use. Perfect. I hung up and returned to my armchair. The pea soup must be cold, but I wasn't hungry. I opened my book again but didn't read a word. Richard thought the sale of my apartment was the end of my story. Little did he know it was just the preface. He messed with the wrong structure. He thought he was dealing with a helpless old woman, not realizing he was declaring war on the woman who taught his father how to sign his first contract. Tomorrow, when he receives the notice, he'll read the name Sunflower Holdings. He'll curse the Germans. He'll cry. And when he has nowhere left to run, when all the doors are closed, he'll have to look at the one door that was always open, but that he insisted on kicking down. And this time, to enter, he'll have to ask for permission and wipe his feet. I turned off the lamp. The darkness of the room was comforting. The game was halfway through, and the black pieces were falling one by one. I smiled in the dark. Tomorrow would be a long day. The phone rang at 7 a.m., tearing through the mountain silence with the urgency of a siren. I was already up, brewing coffee in a cloth filter, the aroma rising to mix with the damp smell of the earth outside. I knew it would be him. The sheriff, following my strict orders, must have arrived at the warehouse gate in the Bronx at exactly 6:30 a.m. when the depot opened. I answered calmly, continuing to pour the hot water with a steady hand. "Mom! Mom, for God's sake, it's over! It's all over!" Richard's voice was a high-pitched, unrecognizable squeal. In the background, I could hear the clang of metal, men's voices shouting, and the unmistakable sound of forklifts. "Good morning, Richard. Breathe. What's happening?" "They're evicting me. Sunflower Holdings, those damn Germans. They sent the police. Mom, they're putting my machinery out on the sidewalk. The cement will harden in the morning dew. My employees are just standing there staring at me like I'm a failure." I took a sip of the black, unsweetened coffee. The bitter taste went down smoothly. "But son, I warned you. You said you'd find a way. Didn't you try to negotiate?" "I tried," he screamed, almost crying. "I sent emails, called the management company, offered to pay the arrears in 20 installments. They didn't even respond. The sheriff said the order is for immediate repossession for personal use." "What personal use? What is some foreign investment fund going to do with an old warehouse in the Bronx? This is a witch hunt." "Sometimes, my son, the owner just gets tired of seeing their property being mistreated," I replied, with a calmness that seemed to enrage him further. "And now? Now I'm on the street, literally on the street, without trucks, without a warehouse, without stock. The mall canceled the contract this morning when they heard about the fleet seizure. The penalty fee will eat what's left of my cash, and I'll still be in debt. I'm bankrupt, Mom. Bankrupt. That money from your apartment. It's gone up in smoke." I heard him sob on the other end of the line, a dry, choked cry of a proud man who finds himself cornered. I didn't feel pity. Pity is a feeling for those who suffer injustices of fate, not for those who sow the wind and are surprised by the storm. What I felt was the need to close the circle. "Richard, wipe your face. Crying in front of your employees is the final nail in the coffin of your leadership." "What do you want me to do? Laugh? I want you to stop acting like a headless chicken. Mr. Stevens called me yesterday. It seems he knows a representative from this Sunflower Holdings." The silence on the other end was immediate. Desperation gave way to a spark of self-serving hope. "Stevens? Your old lawyer? What does he have to do with an international fund?" "Stevens has connections, Richard. He said he managed to schedule an emergency meeting with the board of the holding company today at 2 p.m. He said it's your only chance to reverse the eviction and maybe get the trucks back." "Are you serious, Mom? Wow, Stevens. I always thought he was a dinosaur, but if he can pull this off." "Where's the meeting?" "At his office downtown?" "No. The representative insisted it be at a neutral location owned by the holding company. Write down the address." "Go on. I've got a pen." 504 West 86th Street, apartment 802. There was a long pause. I could hear his breathing catch. "Mom, that's the address of your apartment, the one I sold." "Is it? What a curious coincidence. Maybe the holding company bought it from that friend of yours. The world works in mysterious ways, doesn't it, my son? Be there at 2 o'clock sharp. Tardiness will not be tolerated." I hung up before he could ask any more questions. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I went to my bedroom, opened the closet, and took out my best navy blue tailored suit, the one I wore to the inauguration of the first building I built with Arthur. I pinned the pearl brooch to the lapel. I looked at myself in the mirror. Grandma Eleanor, restorer of furniture and baker of cakes, would stay in the Hudson Valley. The person going down to the city today was Mrs. Eleanor, chairwoman of the board. I arrived at the apartment on the Upper West Side an hour early. The doorman, Carl, nearly fell out of his chair when he saw me walk in, not as the evicted widow, but as the owner with the keys in her hand. Mrs. Eleanor, but Mr. Richard said. Mr. Richard talks a lot and knows little, Carl. I smiled, handing him a box of crystallized ginger I'd brought from upstate. The apartment is back in the family, but today I need you to be discreet. When my son arrives, just send him up. Don't announce him, just open the gate. I rode the old elevator, listening to the familiar clanks of the gears. As I entered 802, the smell of fresh paint hit me. Mark Vincent, in his haste to flip the property, had painted the walls an icy white, erasing the marks of my pictures and the creamy tone I loved so much. The apartment was empty, no furniture, no rugs, no life, just the parquet floor that was in desperate need of a wax. In the center of the living room, Mr. Stevens had already set up a simple glass table and 3 chairs, as we had arranged. He was standing, looking out at the Hudson River through the open window. The sound of the city and the distant ships entered without an invitation. You look impeccable, Eleanor, he said, turning. The documents are all here. The deed to the warehouse, the titles for the truck debt, the deed to this apartment, and the articles of incorporation for Sunflower Holdings. Thank you, Stevens. You were brilliant with the buyback. It was easy. Fear makes people sell cheap and buy dear. Your son is experiencing that firsthand today. I sat in the chair facing the front door, the position of command. I placed my handbag on the table and folded my hands. It was 1:55 p.m. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Not a knock, just the shrill buzz. Come in. My voice echoed in the empty room. The door opened. Richard entered, flustered, sweating profusely in his expensive suit, which now seemed a size too big for him. He looked at Stevens, then scanned the empty apartment with confused eyes. Finally, his gaze landed on me. He stopped, his hand still on the doorknob. Mom? He frowned, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. What are you doing here? Stevens said the meeting was with the board of Sunflower Holdings. Did you come to plead for me? I already told you not to meddle in my business. This is the big leagues. Close the door, Richard, I ordered in a low metallic tone he hadn't heard since he was 10 and broke the neighbor's window. He obeyed reflexively but continued to complain as he walked to the table. Where are they, Stevens? Where are the Germans? This is surreal, being back here. Mark Vincent told me he sold to a foreign group. I can't believe I have to negotiate for my life in the living room where I grew up. Sit down, Stevens said, pointing to the empty chair in front of me. Richard sat on the edge of the chair, tapping his foot nervously. Look, I don't have time for suspense. If the foreigners are going to be late, I'm leaving. I have to try and get a loan from a shark in Queens. There will be no loan shark, Richard, I said, opening the black portfolio on the table. And there are no Germans. There never were. He looked at me irritated. What are you talking about? Sunflower Holdings. Sunflower Holdings, I interrupted, placing the articles of incorporation on the table and sliding them toward him, was founded in 1982. Majority shareholder and lifetime director, Eleanor Albright. Richard stared at the paper. He read it, blinked, read it again. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He lifted his eyes to me, and for the first time, I saw real fear. Not the fear of bankruptcy, but the fear of someone who discovers the ground beneath his feet was never ground at all, but the palm of a giant's hand. You, he whispered, Sunflower. Is you? Sunflower, your father's favorite flower. You never did pay attention to the details, did you? But the warehouse, mine. I bought it when you were still in kindergarten. The trucks? Credit G. A subsidiary of Sunflower, Richard. I bought your debt. I had your trucks repossessed. He jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over backward. The crash echoed violently in the empty apartment. You what? You sent the police after your own son? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You broke me, Mom. Are you insane? This is sadistic. Sit down, My voice exploded, filling the room with an authority that made even Steven sit up straighter. I said, "Sit down." Richard faltered. He looked at the door, then at me. He saw something in my eyes he had never seen before. It wasn't the mother who made soup. It was the woman who bent contractors to her will. He slowly picked up the chair and sat down, hunched over. "I didn't break you, Richard. You broke yourself. I just stopped holding the pieces together." I pushed another document toward him, the deed to the apartment we were in. "You sold this apartment for $800,000. You said I didn't need it. You said it was the least of my assets." He tried to argue, his voice weak, and it wasn't. "You have a multi-million-dollar holding company and you hid it from me?" "I was struggling with the company and you were sitting on a gold mine. What kind of mother does that?" "The kind of mother who watched her son burn through his father's inheritance on imported cars and first-class travel before he ever turned a profit. The kind of mother who got tired of being treated like a senile old woman who's only good for signing blank checks." I stood up and walked to the window. The sea breeze tousled my white hair, but I didn't mind. "You said this apartment was the smallest." I turned to face him. "And you were right. Financially, it's a drop in the ocean. But morally, Richard, it was the test. And you failed." "I was going to give you the money back," he muttered, looking at his own hands. "Lies. You were going to spend it covering your interest payments just like you did. And then you would have sold the house in the Hudson Valley, and then the jewelry, until there was nothing left. You're a bottomless pit, my son, because you don't build. You only consume." Stevens cleared his throat and placed a spreadsheet on the table. "The situation is as follows, Richard. Sunflower Holdings owns your place of business. Credit G owns your fleet. And Mrs. Eleanor holds all the capital you need to avoid being arrested for tax fraud on Monday." Richard went pale. Reality crashed down on him like an anvil. He had no way out. The loan shark wouldn't save him. His friends wouldn't save him. He was completely in my hands. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice trembling, tears in his eyes. "Are you going to take the company from me? Leave me destitute to teach me a lesson?" I returned to the table and sat, looking him straight in the eye. "I could, and you would deserve it. You invaded my privacy, sold my memories, and discarded my history as if it were trash. But unfortunately for me and fortunately for you, I am still your mother." He let out a sigh of relief. "Thank God. Mom, I promise I'll—" "Be quiet, I'm not finished." The cut was sharp. "I am not giving you any money. The well is dry, Richard. It's over." His eyes widened. "Then how will I—" "You won't. You will restructure your company. Sunflower Holdings will assume majority control of your construction firm. You will no longer be the owner. You will be an employee. Director of operations. A fixed salary, no bonus, no corporate card." "You want me to be your employee?" He looked offended, which was laughable given the circumstances. "I want you to actually work. You'll have to clock in. You'll have to report to me and Mr. Stevens every Friday. If the results are good, you keep your job. If you try to embezzle a single penny, I will fire you and call in your debts. Then you will know destitution." "And the apartment?" he asked, looking around. "The apartment is mine again, and it will remain so. You will never again have power of attorney to sell so much as a pin of mine, and my china that you broke. I will deduct it from your salary, month by month, every plate, every cup. It will take years, but you will pay the price for the history you destroyed." Richard sank into his chair. He seemed to have shrunk by several inches. The arrogance, the expensive suit, the gold watch, it all looked like a cheap costume against the raw reality of the contracts on the table. "You planned all of this," he said, a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration in his voice. "The eviction, the trucks, the buyback. You did this all by yourself?" I smiled. A small but toothy smile. "I restore old things, Richard. To restore something, sometimes you have to take the whole piece apart, sand it down to the raw wood, strip away all the old rotten varnish so you can start anew. That's what I'm doing to you. I'm sanding you down. It will hurt, it will sting, but it's the only way you'll stop being a cheap imitation and become solid hardwood. I held out his father's gold pen toward him. Sign the transfer of controlling shares, or walk out that door and try your luck with the loan shark. The choice is yours. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of the waves outside. Richard looked at the pen. He looked at me. He saw there was no bluff, no mommy to the rescue. There was only a businesswoman making a hostile takeover bid. With a trembling hand, he took the pen. As he signed away the work of a lifetime, his and mine, to its rightful place, I felt an immense peace. The apartment was empty, but my heart was full. I had recovered my roof, but more importantly, I had just begun to renovate the most important structure in my life, my son's character. He dropped the pen and bowed his head in defeat. "And now, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Now, Richard, you will get up, straighten that suit, and go back to the warehouse. Mr. Stevens will call the sheriff to suspend the eviction. You have a schedule to keep and concrete to pour. And you?" I looked out at the stunning view of the city skyline, the river stretching to the horizon. "I'm going to stay here for a bit. I need to measure the walls. I'm going to redecorate this place. And this time, no one will take anything from here without my permission." He stood up, walked to the door, and paused. He didn't look back. He left in silence, closing the door gently behind him, without a slam. I took a deep breath, the city air filling the empty room. The lesson was given, the pain was felt. Now the reconstruction began. Who would have thought that at 74, I would feel so alive? They think old age makes us fragile, but they forget that the oldest trees have the deepest roots and the toughest bark. The apartment was the least of his problems. His biggest problem was forgetting that before I was a little old lady, I was the woman who built the world he played in. And the owner of the board always knows when it's time for checkmate. The scent of carnauba wax and lavender filled apartment 802, finally replacing the synthetic odor of the cheap paint that Mark Vincent had used. 6 months had passed since that fateful afternoon when I revealed to my son who truly held the reins of our life. 6 months of a renovation that involved not just sanding the parquet floors and repainting the walls a creamy white, but primarily rebuilding the character of a 45-year-old man. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, a bergère I had brought back from the Hudson Valley, watching the traffic on Riverside Drive through the open window. The hum of the city mixed with distant sirens, a chaotic symphony I was learning to love again. The apartment wasn't empty now. My Persian rugs covered the floors. The custom-made mahogany bookcases already housed the books I had recovered and new acquisitions. But there were empty spaces on the glass shelves, deliberate gaps where the broken china used to be. The intercom buzzed promptly at 2 p.m. "Mrs. Eleanor, your son Richard is on his way up," announced Carl, with a deference that he now extended to my son as well. Not because he was an arrogant executive, but because he was a man who had learned to say good morning and thank you. "Send him up, Carl." The door opened a few minutes later. Richard walked in, but not the Richard from before. The impeccably tailored Italian suit was gone. In its place, he wore good quality jeans, a polo shirt with the construction company's logo, and clean but well-worn safety boots. He looked more tired, it was true. There were new lines around his eyes and some gray hairs he had stopped dyeing, but for the first time in his life, he looked solid. "Good afternoon, Mom. Do you need me to take my boots off?" he asked, stopping on the doormat. "No need, son. The floor can handle it. Sit down. The coffee is fresh." He sat at the glass table, the same one where he had signed away control of his company. He opened a simple cardboard folder. No tablet, no state-of-the-art laptop. "I brought the monthly balance sheet and the schedule for the mall project. We managed to get back on track. The team worked double shifts last week, voluntarily, because they saw I was there with them, pouring concrete until late at night." I took the papers. The numbers didn't lie. The profit margin was smaller than in the days when he cooked the books, but it was real. It was clean money, no debt, no fiscal trickery. "Stevens told me the cash flow is positive for the first time in 3 years, I commented, analyzing a column of expenses. "I see you cut the car leases for the directors." "Yeah." Richard scratched the back of his neck, a gesture of humility he had taken a while to learn. I realized I don't need an armored car to go to a construction site. My compact car works just fine, and the savings paid for the repairs on the mixers that were out of service. I smiled internally, maintaining a serene expression. Sunflower Holdings, that is me, had been a strict boss. I cut all the perks. His salary was now market rate, and a large part of it was withheld to pay back the loan I'd made to save the company from bankruptcy. He was living on the essentials, and curiously, he seemed lighter for it. Very good, Richard. The board is satisfied. I closed the folder. But you didn't just come here today to talk about cement, did you? He took a deep breath and reached into his pants pocket. From it, he pulled a brown envelope and a small box wrapped in tissue paper. This is the check for this month's installment on the personal debt. For what I wasted of your assets. I took the envelope without opening it. I knew the amount would be correct down to the last cent. And this? I pointed to the small box. Richard pushed the package towards me carefully, as if it were a bomb about to explode. I know it doesn't fix what I did. I know that cobalt blue dinner service was a family heirloom and that no amount of money can bring back its history. But I spent the last few weekends browsing the antique shops on the Lower East Side and in Greenwich Village. I undid the ribbon with my fingers, calloused from manual labor. I opened the tissue paper. Inside was a saucer, just one saucer, of English porcelain, cobalt blue with a gold rim. It wasn't identical to my lost set. The shade of blue was slightly darker, and the pattern on the rim was a bit more floral, but it was an authentic piece from the 19th century. The antique dealer said it's hard to find a complete set, he explained, his words tumbling out in his eagerness. But I found this saucer. It was dirty, tossed in a box of junk. I thought of you. I remembered what you said about sanding down to find the good wood. I cleaned it, Mom. I used that polish you taught me about. I picked up the saucer and held it up to the light. There were no cracks. The translucent porcelain gleamed. You restored it, I whispered, a lump forming in my throat that had nothing to do with sadness. Yeah, I restored it. His eyes welled up. Mom, I'm so sorry. Not for the money, but for thinking your things were junk. Now that I'm really working, now that I see the sweat it takes to build a wall, I understand the value of keeping that wall standing. I placed the saucer on the table next to my coffee cup. It's accepted, Richard. It's a beautiful piece. It will have a place of honor on the shelf. He let out the breath he had been holding and smiled. A boyish, genuine smile without the arrogance of the failed entrepreneur. Thank you, Mom. Now finish your coffee. You have a site to inspect, and I have an appointment. An appointment? Are you going back upstate today? No, I'm going to the warehouse in the Bronx. He frowned, confused. To the company warehouse? To do what? It's full of dust and noise there. Exactly. I'm going to inspect the new annex. I've decided that Sunflower Holdings will expand its operations. Expand? Are we buying more land? I stood up, smoothed the skirt of my dress, and picked up my handbag. No, my son. We're investing in human capital. I'm opening a school for restoration and carpentry in the warehouse annex for young people from the community who need a trade. And guess who's going to teach the classes on project management and budgeting in his spare time? Richard pointed to his own chest, surprised. Me? But Mom, I'm barely managing the construction company. You're managing it very well because you stopped pretending. And the one who has learned how to get out of a hole is the best one to teach others how not to fall into it. Let's go. I'll drive. We left the apartment, and as Carl held the building door open for us, I felt the New York sun warm my face. The city breeze carried promises of new times. The drive to the Bronx was quiet. Richard sat in the passenger seat, watching the city go by. He commented on the architecture of some old buildings, noticing details that his greedy haste would have previously overlooked. He was learning to see. When we arrived at the warehouse, the workers stopped to greet us, not with fear, but with respect. "Mrs. Eleanor!" shouted the site foreman, taking off his hard hat. "Mr. Richard, the concrete for slab 3 has arrived." Seeing my son roll up his sleeves and go check the delivery ticket, greeting the truck driver by name, was the greatest reward I could have asked for. That man there, with dust on his boots, was worth 1,000 times more than the executive in the suit who sold my apartment. I walked to the back of the property where the annex was being renovated. The smell of fresh sawdust was my favorite perfume. There, in that large space, I would see new stories begin. Young people learning that the old is not disposable, that wood has memory, that with patience, skill, and love, anything can be fixed, even broken families. I leaned against a workbench, watching my son from a distance as he gestured with the foreman. I remembered his words on the phone months ago. "Mom, you didn't need that place anymore." He thought he was talking about the apartment, but he was actually talking about my essence. He thought I no longer needed to be the strong Eleanor, the visionary Eleanor. He wanted me to be just the old lady waiting for death in the mountains. What a foolish mistake. Old age is not the end of usefulness. It is the peak of competence. It's when you have all the tools, all the knowledge, and if you're lucky, the courage to use them without apology. That apartment on the Upper West Side, the least of my assets, ended up being the cornerstone of my greatest work. It wasn't just for me to see the city. It was for me to see the truth. And the truth, raw and unvarnished like bare wood, is that it's never too late to raise a son, even if it means you have to fire the businessman to hire the man. Richard walked towards me, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mom, the foreman said you ordered solid oak workbenches for the school. That's fine wood. It's expensive." "It's an investment, Richard. If they learn to work with what's good, they won't settle for just anything in life. Quality educates." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I was thinking. That saucer I gave you. I saw a cup that might be a match at a flea market in Brooklyn on Sunday. Do you want to go with me to take a look? We can have lunch after. My treat, with my salary." I smiled. And this time my smile reached my eyes, making the wrinkles meet with joy. "I would love that, my son. But pick somewhere cheap. You still have many installments to pay on that china." He laughed, a light, easy laugh. "You got it, Mrs. Eleanor. I know a diner that serves a good, honest meal. You'll like it." As he went back to work, I looked down at my hands. They trembled a little, it's true. Age takes its toll on the body. But my mind was as sharp as a newly honed chisel. I got back my apartment, my dignity, my company, but above all, I got my son back from the clutches of futility. I looked around the warehouse, where sunlight streamed through the translucent roof panels, illuminating the dust dancing in the air like golden particles. They say you can't take anything with you from this life. They're wrong. You take what you leave behind. I'll leave buildings. I'll leave restored furniture. I'll leave a school. But my greatest legacy was right there, 20 yards away, checking the level on a wall and finally learning to build something that lasts. I picked up a piece of sandpaper from the workbench and began to smooth a rough edge on the wood. The motion was automatic, therapeutic. That's just how life is. When you think the work is done, you discover you were just laying the foundation for the next floor. And I still have plenty of concrete to pour. After all, antiques don't get old, they gain value, and I've just readjusted my market price.